Welcome to the 2024-2025 opening concert of the Temperament Masterwork Series with your Windsor Symphony Orchestra on September 21st and 22nd. We opened the program with the Concerto for Violin and Orchestra by Felix Mendelssohn, performed by the incredible violinist Blake Pouliot. He's the winner of the grand prize in 2016 of the Montreal Symphony Manulife competition and was nominated for a Juno in 2019 for his album of French music. He is easily one of the top violinists of his generation. Now, the concerto itself was written between the years 1838 and 1845. Mendelssohn tweaked it a number of times, particularly because of his collaboration with Ferdinand David, the concertmaster of the Gewandhaus Orchestra, Mendelssohn's orchestra. They worked really hand in hand as they wrote this piece and tweaked it together. And because of this, this piece has not only become a part of the standard repertoire, it's a concerto that many violinists, students and professionals alike, love to play. It's very well written for the violin. In fact, Blake tells us just a bit now about its place in the violin concerto repertoire.
So, like you said, Mendelssohn Violin Concerto is definitely one of the most famous violin concertos. And I think for anyone who's kind of a classical enthusiast, it's definitely one of the most famous classical pieces, I think, of all time, too. It's a very interesting piece to kind of revisit and experience throughout your career, because it's something that I think I would say almost every violinist who becomes a professional, whether they're in the Windsor Symphony, whether in another orchestra in the world, whether they're a soloist, a chamber musician, I would probably argue that every single one has either learned the violin concerto of Mendelssohn or performed it or studied it. It's just kind of, I feel like it's unanimously understood that that's something that you learn. And I think it's also something that we as violinists fall in love with very quickly when we discover that it's something we want to do. It's just, you can't not like it. It has three movements of absolutely beautiful melodies. And even from the time that the piece was first premiered, it was popular. After its first premiere, it was already known as something very exciting, and crowds immediately loved it. And then it was something through the lineage of time that's kind of just withstood it. It's always been popular, and it's been played kind of forever, and really kind of deemed the young person's violin concerto. It's something that I think all of us have to champion.
The concerto itself is in three movements like you would expect. However, there are some unusual characteristics. One is that all three movements are connected, so it's 30 minutes of continual playing. The second is that in a concerto of this time period, it was typical for the composer to write a long introduction and then introduce the soloist. In this particular piece, the violinist comes in almost immediately from the beginning, performing really a heart-achingly beautiful melody. Now, this melody will be even more beautiful in Blake's hands, and I'll tell you why, because he is playing a most extraordinary instrument, 1729 Guarneri del Gesù violin. It is a very special instrument, and recently I asked Blake to tell us about this particular instrument.
Absolutely, yeah. So originally this instrument was owned and was kind of collected by the Canada Council for the Arts. So the Canada Council has this government program called the Musical Instrument Bank, which essentially they have a collection of multiple Stradivarius violins. They had this Guarneri del Gesù, and all of these instruments are owned some by the council, but a lot by kind of individuals who kind of contribute them to this. And there's a competition on rotation, and every 3 years you get to audition and apply. And if you get a rank, you get to pick one of the instruments. So they rank the winners between number 1 and I would say 12 or so, because I think there's about 12 violins, 12 to 15. And whatever your number is, that's kind of what number you are in line, to kind of go in and test all of them. And I was very fortunate that in 2015, I was the first choice. So I had my pick of the litter, and we're given a little bit of time beforehand to kind of test them all. And I kind of really honed in on this instrument. I had tried the Stradivarius and I didn't like them as much. And this one just kind of spoke to me, and it was just such a beautiful instrument. I just couldn't say no. So when I was super fortunate to get that rank, I picked that. And yeah, and then after 3 years, I did it again and was once again selected as their first choice. So I picked the same instrument, and then it's now kind of out of a private thing, and now it's kind of loaned to me independently, not part of the council.
The concert closes with one of the greatest showpieces written for orchestra ever. It is the Concerto for Orchestra by the Hungarian composer Béla Bartók. Now, Béla Bartók was one of the early ethnomusicologists. That's to say, he would go into the mountains or into little villages and he would record, using a phonograph, actual folk tunes, and then he would transcribe them and write them down. Now, his music is very inspired by folk music, but he never uses actual folk tunes. He just takes the idea of the folk tunes, whether it's the scales that they were using or the phrasing or the emphasis. He would use those in creating his own melodies. You will hear that throughout this piece. In April of 1940, he left Hungary and went to America. And from that trip, he was offered a position at Columbia University. At Columbia University, his job was to transcribe and analyze Serbo-Croatian folk songs. This one-year position eventually turned into 2, but Bartók really didn't get much work done while he was there because he hated living in the big city. He hated living in New York. He didn't like the noise. He didn't like the difficulty of living in the city. And truthfully, he was starting to develop some medical issues. Because of that, in fact, what it was he ended up with chronic myeloid leukemia. He was never actually told what he had, but he knew that he wasn't feeling well. So he went and he was admitted and he spent some time in the hospital. But at the time of his sickness, he was so poor and his family needed help that it was actually Harvard University and ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, who took care of his medical bills. Now, the work itself, how did it come to be? While he was in the hospital, the great conductor of the Boston Symphony, Sergei Koussevitzky, came to him and asked him to write a brand new piece. At first, Bartók was quite hesitant. He didn't feel well, and he really had a sense of his own mortality. But eventually, Koussevitzky convinced him that him writing a piece for the Boston Symphony was the way to go, and he did it. He was sponsored by the Koussevitzky Foundation, which was a foundation that Sergei had set up for his wife, who had just passed away. And based on that, he was commissioned to write this piece that we're going to perform for you, the Concerto for Orchestra. He wrote it between August 15th and October 8th of 1943 while he was on vacation and healing in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. Now, this piece is based on the very ancient idea, or rather ancient idea, of a concerto grosso. That's to say, a concerto for multiple solo instruments. He just takes it to the nth degree. And he writes a piece that really features every family of instruments in the orchestra. So every musician in the Windsor Symphony will be a soloist during this piece. The orchestra itself is not particularly huge. It's a good-sized orchestra, but the work itself was premiered on December 1st, 1944, to great acclaim, I might add. Overall, the work takes you on a journey from darkness into light. The first movement, which is called the introduction, really takes advantage of Hungarian rhythms, and you will hear in the melody ta-ta-ta-tam, ta-ta-ta-tam, emphasis on the first couple of syllables of each musical word. Particularly things to listen for is the harp. In this movement, the harp uses wooden sticks to play to create a certain kind of sound. The second movement is called Game of Pairs, and it pairs up each of the woodwind instruments together. The third movement is an elegy, and it really is a depiction in music of nocturnal sounds. The fourth movement is an intermezzo, beautiful melody, but it has a very unusual meter, which gives it a little bit of an off-kilter feel. But really, it's the kind of tune that you might go out of the hall humming. The finale is nothing shy of a miracle. It's incredibly virtuosic. The strings in particular are required to play at an incredible speed, and it's very, very thrilling. I can't wait to share this piece with you. This is Béla Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra, and we will see you on September 21st and 22nd.